Guys, can you move it down for something?
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our first State of the Nation event for 2021, hosted by Retail Doctor Group. It was a brief introduction. My name is Anastasia Lloyd-Wallace. I head up the Consumer Insights Division of Retail Doctor Group. And this morning, we're going to talk to you about knowledge is power. And I'm just going to very quickly pass across to Brian. But firstly, a few housekeeping. If you've got any questions, feel free to put them into the Q&A and we'll put these to our speakers. Secondly, if you do need to leave early, we will be sending across a recording of the session so you can watch it later. There'll also be a podcast of the session available. So any questions at all, as always, feel free to send us an email and put any immediate questions in the Q&A. All right, without further ado, I'm going to pass us across to Brian Walker, the CEO of Retail Doctor Group.
Good morning, Anastasia, and good morning, everyone. And thank you very much for joining, as Anastasia says, our first State of the Nation, and actually our 10th overall. So we're delighted to bring this to our community, and also particularly delighted today to welcome our speakers. And we're going to lead this morning with Daniel Agostinelli, who heads up the Accent Group. And Daniel, really delighted that you're with us this morning. What a powerful business, over 550 stores here and across New Zealand. My old alma mater is Athlete's Foot, is somewhere in that mix of Hype, Doc Martens through to the Athlete's Foot, Timberland. I mean, there's a wide range. Have a look online. But this is a really interesting story because, and Daniel will take us through it, it's a business that strategized through change, through COVID, continues to grow, extraordinary performance, well recognized by the market. And on that note, I'll introduce you to Daniel, and we're going to talk about the trends, the underpinning story of Accent Group, and how they've built this business through what has certainly been some uncertainty in the last year to 2 years. So Daniel, welcome and good morning. Now, I think you might be on mute, Daniel.
Here we go. Good morning, everyone. Apologies for that. Technology is not my main point. I'm learning. But thank you very much for listening to me this morning. And thanks to the Retail Doctor team for having me on today. We are the Accent Group. We're a publicly listed business, primarily in footwear and slowly but surely moving into apparel. We are, most of our brands are fairly recognized, the main ones being Platypus, Hype, Skechers, Vans, Dr. Martens, and so on. We have 18 brands in our business, and we hope to grow moving forward. I'd like to take you through a little bit about what we did through COVID. I'm sure, like everyone else on this call, it's affected all of us. And we worked with the initial shock of March of last year, having to close down 500 odd stores, somehow keep 5,000 people employed. So we had a stand down. Thankfully, JobKeeper was announced pretty soon after, and we went on our way to work out what we were going to do. We used a couple of pretty strong messages internally with the management team that we drove to the business. And I'm going to use a couple of acronyms today, and I'll explain what they are. So the first thing we did is we used what we called the 3 A's. And the first one was accept. We had to actually accept what was going on. That was the hardest bit for us because we're a business that opens stores, not closes them. So it was kind of a shock, as it was to, I assume, many people on this call, in whatever industry you were in. So that was the accept bit. And then we had to come up with another word, and we come up with adapt. And that was a very, very strong word. So accept and then adapt. And by adapt, we started to really see an explosion of our digital sales. And we're publicly listed, so I can share some of these numbers. But, you know, we were doing the best part of, you know, $300,000 a day online and so on pre-COVID. We started to see numbers of well over $1 million a day as the stores were closed. And that really made us think, well, this is our way of continuing to get sales into the business. And at the same time, being a retailer, we carry the best part of $150 million of stock and inventory, which would age, and that would cause us a problem down the line. So we very, very quickly adapted into this being an online player only, which was an interesting time. Simultaneously, we actually rolled the dice, so to speak, and we actually put most of the businesses on TV, which is something we'd never done, promoting the fact that we were still open 24/7, but online. And sales continued to grow in our favor, which was fantastic. So that was the accept and adapt piece. The third piece we used was accelerate. Once we started to get sales into the business, we had JobKeeper under control, and we had our team safe and working in our stores in what we call dark stores. So they were simply fulfilling digital orders, all wearing the masks, and that allowed us to keep everybody employed and at least functioning, which was an important piece, not just for sales and so on, but also for mental health. We got all these young kids that were, you know, like all of us, had never faced anything like this, and at least they were doing something in a safe environment. And then the accelerate piece just continued to grow for us. We started to adapt into actually thinking about opening a business via Zoom. And I proudly can share with you today that we opened a business called Pivot in Shell Harbour, Sydney, all on Zoom, which was very, very challenging, but rewarding at the same time, because we certainly learned a lot about you know, new ways to do things, and it was just very, very powerful. The big learnings that we've got in terms of what we learned through this period was that the adapt piece really made us think about, well, what are the important things in order for us to stay strong, stay relevant, and indeed grow our sales, grow our profits, and indeed grow our overall business. And we embarked on strengthening our database. And once again, I'm going to use a couple more acronyms here, and we called these three the VVV. And the first one was VIP. We really started to engage and do what we could to sign up more and more people to our database. And we're sitting today at about 7.8 million customers on our database. That's a big share of Australia. And we really embarked on working that database and really sending out you know, emails to that database explaining the offers that we had, and that proved to be very, very strong through this period. So once again, the customer is king, and we started to work that database very, very strongly. So that's the first V, VIP. The next one was virtual, which was another V. And we started to view that people were still, or customers were still very happy to engage with us. Although they couldn't get to our stores, they could get to our websites. And we started to notice that we had thousands of customers coming in through our chat lines on all the sites. And we have 18 websites. So we very quickly had to adapt and get teams in their homes to fulfill all these questions that were coming through. And we launched an app called Hero, H-E-R-O. And this app allows us to actually sell online virtually. So almost as if there's a counter between us, no different than we would in a store. And to my delight, it grew very, very quickly to the point that we at one stage had about 35 people from their homes simply selling virtually online, and all coming from chat lines. And the sales have been very, very strong. So once again, that was our sort of way to accelerate what was a crisis. It certainly allowed us to get in front of the game in our view and simply use technology better than we ever had before. And I'm very proud of our digital team and indeed my overall team for what they did. And that really led us, well, particularly myself, to look at the business overall. And the main learnings that we got from all this was that people are just so important to get the right people at every level. And not just in the top tier, but in the second tier, in the third tier, and indeed across the overall business, that great people matter. And, you know, I'm very proud of what we were able to achieve. And more of the learnings from us was simply being obsessed with the customer. That was something that we thought we were doing well, but it certainly proved through the crisis that we needed to think about what did the customer actually want. It didn't matter. It didn't matter whether you were a great business or not. Customers don't care about cost control or what you're doing internally. They simply care about speed, particularly when it comes to digital and online, and they want service. They want it delivered. Everything else does not matter to them. And thankfully, we started to work very closely with our distribution centre and all of our partners in terms of even Australia Post and all the guys that were able to get products out to our customers with service. Back to the VIP for a moment. One of the very big learnings was that we had to do more than just be a business that sold footwear. So we had to figure out, how do we surprise and delight customers, particularly online and indeed in stores. And one of the things we started to do is come up with some engineered products that were good value, great new colors. And of course, thankfully, in our part of the world, many people were walking more, were lounging around, and lots of our products played into that. So we really tried to delight them with products that we probably wouldn't have sold prior to COVID, and certainly move very quickly to get these products into market. The overall drive for us that's come out of all these learnings is that, of course, digital sales have really exploded through this period. We're probably 2 years in front of where our budgeting systems showed that we should be at. We don't feel, from our point of view, that this will hold. Customers are definitely starting to go back to stores, and I just think that people want to get out more. And that's led us to think, well, if that's the case, and we assume it is, we've got to do more with our stores. And by that, I mean we have to keep reinvesting in our stores if we're going to keep that channel strong. And by that, I mean that, we're looking to refit many stores at the same time as opening new stores where commercials make sense. And opening a store is the easy bit, but ensuring that they're innovating and exciting for particularly the youth of Australia that we service is the challenge that I've put on my team. i.e., we have DJs on the weekends, and this particular market segment likes and loves that sort of stuff because it appeals to what they like, particularly in the music area. And we are looking for more and more items that will allow us to keep the stores as exciting as we possibly can. And that sort of has really allowed us to look at, well, what else can we do in our stores? And that was the learning. So I mentioned VIP being the database, virtual being the hero app, and we are building a new office in Melbourne to further strengthen that. And we're in Richmond, Melbourne. If you're ever in town and you want to take a look, and I'm available, I'll certainly take you through. But we're really investing heavily in this virtual space, which to me is just an extension of what digital sales will do in the future. And the third piece that we've learned in terms of the V acronym was vertical. We've really seen that our customers resonate with our brands, particularly Platypus and Hype. and we've come up with some products that we've put in our stores that are made 100% by us. They're not particularly branded. They sit next to Nike, Adidas, Puma, and all the big brands of the world. But, you know, we've got a little piece that we hope to grow in terms of the vertical space. And of course, those of you that are in retail will know that vertical comes with a stronger margin. And it just keeps our business a little bit more exciting and innovating and being on trend with just having the same sort of products that everybody else has. So that's sort of a brief update of what we did. I'm sure many of you on this call have got similar stories to us. It's been a very interesting ride through the last 12 months. And I think 2021 is going to be an even more interesting ride. From our point of view, we certainly don't think that COVID is over. We hope the jab works for all of us and we can just get on with being a good business and you know, continuing to grow in a space in Australia and New Zealand. And that's sort of my little brief on us, the Accent Group.
Daniel, thank you very much. That was a great summary. I'm interested in a couple of aspects. One is how the board and the executive hold their nerve through these periods. And, you know, I listened to you and you're talking very much, and rightfully so, about a physical experience centered amongst the other channels, about a great customer VIP, but also the need to keep reinvesting capital into the business to keep growth through these periods. But that takes holding nerve, doesn't it? By shareholders, by boards, by executive. How do you go about that?
Look, it's always interesting with a board. Thankfully, I've got a supportive board. Back in March of last year, it was a very scary time for myself as CEO and my team, and indeed our board. You know, we had lots and lots of product on the water coming our way, nowhere to put it, nowhere to sell it. Indeed, there were questions for I assume everybody on this call about, you know, are we going to survive this? Are we actually solvent given that, you know, we've got no sales coming in and we have a lot of creditors to pay. We have a lot of rents to pay. But I've got a great board who really work closely with myself and the management team, and we maneuvered. But it's interesting what a crisis does. It makes you really review what you're doing in your business at every single level. You know, how do we do things faster? How do we do them cheaper? How do we do them more efficiently? And most importantly, though, we were very, we were one of the first businesses to close our doors when this COVID thing was particularly strong in Melbourne. And it was simply unsafe to keep trading. We didn't have any knowledge about sanitizer. We didn't have any sanitizer. You know, we didn't have masks. So we went out and closed the whole business without JobKeeper at that stage. So it was a very, very scary time.
18 brands, 18 segments to the market, 18 different types of environments in which to physically place, and then all the channel strategy around that, from vertical, as you say, Daniel, online. The channel becomes somewhat academic, doesn't it? If people can get to the physical experience, that's great. If they can't, they're online, and you're communicating through your database all the time. So retail changes, doesn't it? It's transforming the organization, the structure, the skill sets. Quite a rapid change, would you say?
Absolutely, a rapid change. And, you know, I think for us and for everyone I speak to, that, you know, simply doing it the way we used to do it, I'm just not sure is going to cut it in the new world. Customers are smarter than they ever were, and so they should be. They expect real service. They expect to be, you know, delighted and surprised by your offer. Otherwise, they simply will go elsewhere, or indeed, they just won't engage with you as a business. So that was a major learning. We've recently opened a business called Style Runner, which was an online-only business. It's a terrific little business, and we opened our very first store in Armadale in Melbourne, and lots of learnings there. That you know, the smell of the store needs to be right. You know, the women that we service in that business, they expect, you know, high-end service, change rooms that are a little bit bigger so that they're actually comfortable, and a team that understands product more than ever before, the benefits of the product. And these are all things we all used to do, particularly in our world of retail, but it certainly highlighted the fact that we simply weren't doing good enough. We you know, we were, you know, we were setting our laurels and that was enough. And, you know, we really learned that that is not enough anymore. And it's almost, you've got to get the, everything going simultaneously, the service piece, the refitting piece of your stores, and indeed the, you know, the right people in these locations, with lots and lots more training to our team than we've ever done before.
I'm conscious that you have a flight to catch, and very appreciative of your time. Anastasia, are there any other questions generally from the audience? And I've got one more for Daniel. And
I've got none here coming through yet. So if anyone does have a quick question they want to put through, if you want to ask yours first, Brian.
Daniel, as you grow, it's also incumbent on the physical sense for your partners, such as shopping centres, to continue to grow their customer experience. Do you think that's generally speaking on the agenda of the shopping centre developers?
Yes, I do. They have obviously the same issues we have. They have to keep their centres exciting, and they have to evolve to what the new customer wants. The bigger centres, Westfield vicinity, I think they're doing a good job to trying to adapt in a pretty tough environment. And we work very, very closely with our landlords, and we have a fairly good relationship. Of course, there's always the argy-bargy of, we want to pay less rent, they want us to pay more rent, but somewhere in between we have to meet. And indeed, we need each other more than ever before, to keep the places, you know, relevant in today's market.
And it's fascinating, isn't it? We know through our insights work, the interesting piece around where is the purchase consummated, where does it actually begin, and how does it get measured? And that will change over time as well. And no doubt you're dealing with that very topic, and perhaps for another day, but it is interesting, isn't it, to contemplate this changing world with online, the digital channels, all the data, the physical experience, and ultimately customer choosing at what point they trigger the purchase mechanism and at what point it's consummated by the retailer. Interesting times.
Absolutely, and that's a good point, Brian. From our point of view, we actually don't care as a business where the sale comes from. This myth that I've learned over the last few years, that digital is cheaper, is not the case. That we're finding, it's the same sort of costing. So from our point of view, we are one business. Whether we get the sale through online or virtually or in our stores, as long as we get the sale and we do a good enough job to service that customer, and hopefully they'll come back and shop with us, that is the total focus of the Accent Group.
Well,
Now
go ahead.
I was going to say, we've had quite a few questions shooting now. So
in
in the essence of time, yeah, maybe we try and get a couple in. So firstly, Daniel, how can retailers use in-store tech to elevate the customer experience? Do you have any thoughts there, or some things that you're doing in store to use sort of technology?
Absolutely. So all of our stores, thankfully pre-COVID, and not because of COVID, obviously we didn't know about it, but we very quickly used our technology and really moved into click and dispatch very, very quickly. Now, you know, when you're a digital business, you've got all your inventory under one roof, and that means you've got to carry a lot of stock and make it turn in some sort of manner that allows you to be profitable. We indeed turned on click and dispatch 3 years ago, and through COVID, it really allowed us to have the overall inventory available to every customer that was coming through our channels. And because of speed that's required, and Australia is quite vast, so if somebody, if again, using technology, if you order a product from us and we don't have it in our DC, the technology will push that request to one of our stores that has that item. It'll then decide through algorithms which store is selling it the slowest, and that's the store that will send it to your home. So you may order a product from us, you live in Sydney, that product may indeed come from Darwin. And we have a great system that'll get it to you next day. And of course, that leads to lower markdowns and allows the stock to be much more productive than just having it in one warehouse. And that's sort of one example of what technology can do that maybe 5 or 6 years ago was very hard to do.
Yeah, that's a great one. On the other end of the scale, then, any thoughts on recycling and sustainability? So this is a topic of conversation that keeps coming up.
Well, look, absolutely. And it's a board agenda for us. We are doing everything we can to make sure that we comply with the requirements, and indeed do our best to go over and above where we can. But simple things like, carry bags and all those things that are sold in the stores. In 3 of our businesses, we've already moved to sustainable products. And indeed, the big one, if you look at carry bags, is reusable, which I think is very, very important. And I think as businesses, it's a great thing to have. They cost a lot more, but at least you got your brand out there and you're doing the right thing for the environment.
Yeah. I mean, we've seen that in all the customer research. Customers saying that they're willing to walk past stores that are not making a sustainable effort to go to a competitor. So it's almost a hygiene factor now.
Absolutely.
And then another question here around sort of the logistical issues that we're seeing in all retail businesses regarding getting freight and stock in time. How are you dealing with that at the moment? Are you using extra margin to air freight goods or?
Thankfully, we haven't had too much trouble, although we've had late deliveries, but not enough for us to have had to air freight in the main. We have done a little bit of it, but we're very, very close with our vendors in that space. Many of you that carry inventory will be aware that there's already murmurs coming out of China that there could be delays coming our way, and that's going to be a challenging time coming our way fairly soon. But we've got a great team that's managing that day in, day out. And in the main, it's been pretty good. What the future holds is going to be an interesting time for all of us, I think.
Fantastic. And in the essence of time, I've just got one more because I know we don't want to keep you too long. How did you keep your team motivated and engaged during the pandemic?
That's a great point and a great question. We ended up using number one, all of our teams we use Zoom a lot. So Zoom was a very, very a big part of what we did. At every level, we tried to engage with our teams, including all the store teams. In one situation, we had what we called our virtual conference. We had the best part of 1,500 people on it. It was a direct link that we used some very high-end technology where we actually had encrypted technology just for our teams for this particular conference. And we did it as if it was virtual. So we gave out awards, we gave out whatever bonuses were available. We gave out lots and lots of learnings about some mental health issues that could be going on. And I think generally the team responded very, very well. There was a very, very big concentrated effort from myself, the management team, and indeed the board to ensure that our people were engaged, safe, and just kept up to date with advice of what the requirements were, where not to go, where to go, how to do it, and so on. But it's a great question. And I think from what I've seen from many, many retailers, and I'm sure many on this call, I think as a group, we all did quite well, given what we were all put through.
Very good, very good. Daniel, I'm very conscious of your flight, very appreciative, we all are. Certainly accepting, adapting, accelerating. And I also think the old acronym of MBWA, management by wandering around, being close to the business, has been one of the success factors. So greatly appreciate it. Look forward to seeing you out there, and good luck, and thank you very much, Daniel.
Thank you all for listening, and I wish you all well for 2021. All the very best.
Likewise.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Daniel.
Thank you very much.
So now moving over to Brian. So Brian's going to give us a bit of an update on where we are at the moment with retail. So Brian, I'll pass to you. We'll share the screen.
Slides there, and we'll do this reasonably quickly now. Are you moving the slides, Anastasia? All right. Well, one of the things that we started with was really looking at this whole concept of strategic development. Increasingly, with all this change, retailers have to be more reliant on good strategy planning, as distinct from, if you like, opinion. And when we really studied our retail communities and here and overseas, we saw an increase in planning out 2021 strategy. And certainly customers, as Anastasia will touch on, looking increasingly for clear differentiation and purpose from brands. That's obviously product purpose, social purpose around sustainability, and for the business, economic purpose and purpose in which to lead their people, their teams, and so forth. And I think Daniel made that point very clearly, which was great. The idea that strategy has inbuilt agility to it, inbuilt speed is crucial. No longer can we think of strategy in 5-7 year windows. We have to be thinking 1 to 3 year periods, and the ability of mobility. COVID-19, of course, has been the biggest accelerant in our lifetime, and everyone knows technology is hastening at 10 times its previous pace. So what would have taken 5 years is taking 5 months. Stores, as touched on by Daniel, are moving from being purely transactional to social, experiential, distribution hubs, data gathering hubs. And so the rise of the brand is one of the themes of this very short talk, and the way that brands embed all these functions and attributes. E-commerce gains, obviously critical, but an interesting point by Daniel saying, and I agree with it, that the pendulum will swing back, that COVID's punched up online growth dramatically. It is hard to be profitable as a small to medium-sized e-commerce player. The human spirit dictates that we will, by instinct, always want to be social. So we'll see this piece really start to come back into this true branded ecosystem play. And it's important for businesses to be contemplating that at the strategy level. Fulfillment, speed, agility, getting product there anytime, anywhere, anyhow that a customer wants. Easy to say, harder to put into play. Daniel gave some great practical examples of that. And of course, the whole piece on community shop builds and growth through those channels. A couple of quick points on things that we're really starting to see. The growing intersection, if you like, between technology, media, and the physical, and well, certainly the retail environment. So technology, media, and retail. And increasingly, we see the Amazonian model, which will be the next slide, as an example of that. Amazon's just hit $1 billion in sales in Australia. And we know that we do spend this amount of time on live TV, 4.5 hours on a smartphone. We are consuming media at a rapid rate. 20% of Americans use streaming services, 63% of Australians. There's 150 million Amazon Prime Video subscribers. So if you think of that in the US, in Australia, it's currently at about 15% and growing, 55% in the US, which is the 150 million. The point being, if you start to think about retail in the sense of 24/7, an enabler for product, an enabler for data, and data being streamed to us in all forms of content. So this gated community. I always thought the real
I think we might have lost Brian there. He seems to have disappeared. Apologies to everyone there. I was just checking out to see what was going on. Hopefully Brian will join back in again shortly. So in the meantime, what we might do is I'll move forwards through the presentation and we can come back to Brian once he comes back in the room. Fantastic. Apologies about that. I'm not entirely sure what happened. It just seemed to cut out. So we'll come back to Brian in a second. And one of the things that I actually want to talk on within our Insights division is, so as you're all aware, if you've been involved in quite a few of our presentations previously, is that we run regular consumer updates to really understand that market and our consumers. And within our Insights division, we dig that step deeper as well to look at their personalities, understand their emotions and their behaviours. And we ran a quick pulse check at the end of January to just understand how this shopping location is changing. And not only changing, but what's going to happen moving forward? Because the question I keep getting asked is, well, we know what has happened, but what's going to keep momentum, what's going to maintain? So we can see that within the last month, we've really seen a change of shopping locations from the last time we did the dipstick back in August. A significant rise in click and collect, a significant rise in community shopping centres. And we're seeing this driven quite a bit as well by our 18 to 34 age groups. So much more interested in that click and collect and that digital presence as we would expect. And this local community shopping centres, so that's the local high street and the shopping centres, we're seeing very much a rise. And we'll come to in a minute sort of why we're seeing that movement with consumers to this space. And then when we said, how has it affected your behaviours? So we want to know, what are consumers doing now that they didn't in the past? And the huge rise in click and collect. So we now know 1 in 5 consumers use it regularly, use it on a monthly basis, and 14% now use click and collect that didn't use it before. So we can see that's a really huge rise. And the one that quite surprised me was the rise of marketplaces. And this touches on from what Brian was saying with the rise of Amazon. So in our research pre-COVID, so 2019, we knew there was around 7% of Australians members of Amazon Prime. Now that's looking around 17%. So this huge growth in the Amazon model, the eBay model, is really driving this use of marketplaces. And we can see now, because Amazon Prime obviously offers video, free delivery, computer games, music. It's got a whole variety of offers. And due to this lockdown period, it's really brought customers in, and they're now understanding how they can appreciate the delivery service and the retail side of it, not just the digital. So we're really seeing this move in marketplaces. So the question is why? And this is the question that I always ask is, it's one thing just having the data tell us our consumers did this, but we want to know why. And in a lot of the research that we do, we dig into emotions, consumer personalities to really understand why they're doing what they're doing. And so we can see quite obviously, I don't want to travel as far, I want to support my local retailer. And the two things that I think really do come out of this is, so 38% want to support local. So of those that have said, yeah, I've changed the way I shop, they said it's because they want to support local. So we're seeing this resurgence of the high street, of the community. But the question is that then becomes, consumers are looking for this human aspect, this human interaction. They want to speak to someone, they want to know their local retailer. And as a local retailer, it's understanding even the bigger brands, how can we localize? How can we make our service so that customers can interact and get to know us as a local retailer? We talk a lot about this for franchise owners, having franchisees who are in fact local, but under the big brand. So how do we bring out the local aspect? And then what we can see when we look at all of this is it's time. So time is a currency. Anyone that was with us back at State of the Nation 9 and 8, we talked about the 4 key consumer trends that we expected to see in 2021. And this time as a currency is really up there. It's convenience versus experiential. So I want to really save time. I don't want to travel as far. I want to do it online because it's easier, it saves me time, less friction. So really looking at customers, how can we save them time or make it an experience that it's time well spent? And I think that's really key here. Where can we save it and where can we make it an experience? So how will this continue? So this is the big question, and as much of a crystal ball as we can get, it's something that everybody always asks me. And we can see this pushing online as we expect. So whilst we don't expect the growth to continue at such an express rate, we do see that the growth that is there now to stay. We can see that customers are going to be shopping online. This is driven by our 18 to 35-year-olds. I remember, if anyone's been with us for a while, we used to say, by 2020, millennials will be the largest spending demographic in the world. Well, we're now in 2021, so this 18 to 35 millennial segment, which has got a bit of Gen Z in there, but we really are leading the way in terms of consumer behaviours. And we can see 38% say that they'll shop online more moving forward, so that's what they'll do. We can see click and collect is here to stay. So I will use click and collect more than I did pre-pandemic. We can see local. So I will shop at my local community shopping centre more than I did pre-pandemic. And this is even higher in our regional areas and also with our older demographics. So 35 plus, very much more in the local community shopping centres. Seeing a slight penchant with our 18 to 35s to stick to the large shopping centres, but very much that younger. And we're remarkably seeing a bit of a difference in our Queensland shoppers as well. So much more looking for local, wanting to support their local retailers. So what does this mean for retailers? So just a couple of takeouts. Firstly, interpret your customers' behavior. Don't just measure the numbers, understand those numbers. What does it actually mean? How can you talk to your customers, get that information, get that data, but turn it into meaningful strategy and meaningful next steps? And as always, as a customer insights person, what are their personalities? What are these demographics? Who are our segments? What are their emotions and what do they want from you as a brand? So as Daniel mentioned, it's more important than ever to really listen to those consumers, to interpret those consumers, and to turn that into key parts of your strategy. So as always, we always say good insights to give that strategy direction. And then some more tactical implementation tips. So optimize the digital offer. So we can see that growth of click and collect and marketplaces is here to stay. So how does that belong into your digital offering? Conduct a business diagnostic to ensure your optimum health. So funnily enough, Daniel said this without realizing that kind of this is one of the things that I was going to point out. It's are we resting on our laurels? What are we doing that we could be better at? Where are we against benchmarks, our industry benchmarks and our own benchmarks? Have we become safe and relaxed? So looking at all areas within your business to understand where are these opportunities and what can we do? And one of the things that we are seeing, the foot traffic is lower, but average transaction values are higher. So our customers are shopping with much more purpose. They know what they want before they leave the house. So one thing for retailers to think about, less foot traffic. So how do we focus on those conversions? Increasing items per sale, average transaction value, in-store training. We're seeing a real surge in in-store training, staff training to really build these connections with customers. And looking at, how do we action this at the point of sale? Back to retail 101, as many might say. And I think that's really quite key, is going back to the basics now. Are we doing everything as good as we could be, or could we be fitter? So then want to summarize there, and I'm going to pass over to Simon. So Simon Fontaine, he's the Managing Director of Lease Info, and he's going to give us a bit of an update on leasing and property and also how that links to strategy. So hi Simon, how are you going? Oh, I think we're on mute a bit there, Simon, if you can just unmute.
Good morning.
Morning.
Morning. Thanks for the opportunity to speak again. Very interesting presentations this morning. So my topics are going to be deciphering this JobKeeper and pandemic extensions. We're going to talk a little bit about an interesting case study that recently happened in New South Wales CBD. And then I'll spend a little bit of time about, you know, what are the possible retail leasing structures emerging now and post-pandemic. So if we start with the first slide, please, after this. So I've got to say that for all of you who are managing national portfolios and that do come under the commercial leasing code of conduct, it's extremely confusing because each state has not necessarily aligned with when JobKeeper ends. So you can see on this slide that some of the states are ending or have already ended, and some of them have extended to the 28th of March, and to make matters more difficult, Queensland's extended to the 30th of April. So it's really a bit of a minefield on when these things end. And there's still, you know, a possibility that these things will be retested again at the end of March. So for the time being, you have those dates there, and that's to the best of our knowledge of when the commercial leasing extensions end. But to make matters even more complicated, New South Wales has created a retest scenario, which I'll talk about, but the eviction and rent increases ban for commercial leases actually ending at a different date to the COVID ban. So so basically, and some states, like for example, Queensland has a different rent increase start date to an eviction ban. So what I suggest that all you do is you really need to be going through and getting separate advice for each state, because it's becoming so complicated as to the point where, you know, people like myself who are trying to monitor this situation, we're actually constantly having to ask ourselves as to what's going on, because it's becoming extremely confusing. And you really need to be getting individual advice about each state. Like, for example, if we look at New South Wales has a further relief package where you need to re-establish your eligibility. And this is where retailers have been caught, and I'll talk about one specifically, where you need to prove that you have an annual turnover, and this is not at the shop level, this is at the group level, of less than 5 million in 2018 and 19, and you'd have experienced a 30% or more decline in turnover in the 2020 December quarter compared to December 2019. So this is, you know, they're retesting it, and unfortunately this has had unintended consequences. So If we go to the next slide, some of you may have read that a retailer called Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, which is a sort of an upmarket bar, was forced to close in Bridge Street, CBD, Sydney, because it's part of a chain and their group turnover was $5 million, more than $5 billion. So what they're saying, and I have empathy for them, is that, you know, the landlord, what has happened is exactly what the code was designed to prevent. So unfortunately, in this case, a retailer has been evicted, and really through no fault of their own, because they did have, you know, a number of restrictions, such as the 4 square metre rule, you know, the CBD traffic in Sydney is nowhere near what it was, you know, and hasn't really recovered. I think that the office rate is about 45% of what it was pre-pandemic. So you can see that this is becoming increasingly problematic and complex. And unfortunately, it's going to get even more complex as we go forward, because the rules may change again post, you know, March. So what I suggest you do is you be constantly in touch with your advisor or your solicitor as to what your obligations are, and make sure that you comply with them. The next section I'm going to talk about briefly is it's very topical about how the rise of online shopping, and this is what we've discussed today, is affecting the world of retail leasing. And it was very interesting to hear, you know, Daniel talk about how his business has been able to use technology to fulfill orders from different parts of the country where there's a demand. So what this is increasingly doing is it's fracturing the retail physical landscape, and a lot of retailers are now wondering what will rental agreements look like post-pandemic, because, you know, rental structures have traditionally been fixed agreements where there is a base rent or minimum rent component, and in shopping centres they do have a turnover component, but that is only if they achieve a turnover or go above a threshold. Whereas, you know, now we have a situation where turnover is a key metric of the ability to pay rent. And increasingly, a number of large retailers have been calling for the linking of rent to sales in a formal structure. And so what I'm going to propose, if you go to the next slide, is there's now 3 broad structures that one of them is not really new, but there's 3 broad structures. One of them is controversial, which I'll talk about briefly at the end, where, you know, they link rent to sales, but also link rent to a share of online sales. But if we go to the first one, the first one is a structure that's been around for a while, and what that is called is a capped occupancy lease. And this is really limits the downside risk of a retailer. So what this means is that the maximum a rent can go to is a agreed percentage of the retailer's sales, and that could either be a net rent or a gross rent. And this limits the downside risk to a retailer. The main disadvantage of this structure is that most landlords are really reluctant to give it, and they only really give it to large, successful brands, probably like Daniel's Group, and ones where the covenant is extremely strong. And also, if they do give that structure, they're really reluctant to give an incentive under this structure, because there's really no, the risk to the landlord is sort of quite high, because potentially the sales could drop substantially on their rents. But in locations where there's a high degree of risk, so for example, at the moment in CBDs around the country, where sales are really uncertain, and predictions about when office workers will come back are still largely unknown, this is sort of being talked about in industry circles increasingly, some sort of capped occupancy. The second structure is a hybrid of that, which is called a cap and collar. And under this scenario, there is a minimum that the rent can go to, but there's also a maximum. So the landlord gets a minimum rent, and the retailer gets a ceiling. So in some ways, it limits the upside and downside for both landlords and tenants. The main disadvantage, again, is that the landlords aren't really excited about giving an incentive if they've substantially reduced their rent, and there's a maximum they can achieve. But on the positive side, the tenants are protected, and to some extent the landlords are protected. So this structure, I think, is going to become more and more prevalent. Again, more for the larger end of town, but you may see it sort of being slid into other types of agreements. And the last one, which is probably the most interesting one in terms of a concept, is this hybrid occupancy lease, which in the UK, as Anastasia would attest to, they're even further ahead in terms of their online sales penetration than here. So, it's typically more than 20% of a total retail sales comes from online. And one of the major landlords, which is Hammerson's, have announced that they're planning to do a flexible turnover-based lease plus an omnichannel top-up rent, which is based on store performance and omni-channel returns, including collect performance in store. Now, so far in Australia, retailers have absolutely flatly rejected providing their online sales to landlords, and not to mention offering these as part of their rent. But if you look at the press recently, the head of Vicinity Shopping Centres mentioned this as a potential possible incentive for landlords to grant turnover-based rents, is to potentially share in the online sales of a retailer. So whilst it may sound a bit far-fetched at the moment, I wouldn't rule it out, because if online sales continue to grow as in the UK, then something in the form of a share may well occur. And it's possible that it may occur sooner than we think. But at the moment, just to be clear, I don't want people to think that this is actually occurring in Australia, because it's not. But it is being talked about internationally as a structure. So again, that's my 15 minutes worth. I hope you guys found it interesting. And if you have any questions, please fire away.
Simon, apologies everyone for that technology dropout, but a question for me is whether you see shopping centre asset development managers actively working with retailers to grow online sales, And
Oh,
therefore,
absolutely, they do. I was at a shopping centre function on Wednesday, and that's all they talked about. That's all that is their focus. That is their absolute focus now. The bigger ones, absolutely, they're 100%. They're investing in it. They've got retail experts now helping landlords trying to maximise that. So that's one of their KPIs. And in fact, interestingly, that the old way that shopping centres measures their own performance was even being talked about. So typically shopping centres always measure their performance in terms of foot traffic and MAT and specialty MAT. That's all probably going to change. They're going to need to add other metrics like digital penetration. That's going to become a key metric for shopping centres. So definitely.
It's going to be fascinating because, as we know, and Anastasia points out, the purchase process starts often many days before the visitation. And so it's just intriguing to me. It'll talk, personally, I think we're starting to see a real transformation in thinking about asset managers, thinking about community and thinking about value they generate for their retailers from the work they do in the community, which you've just given an example of. Much less the idea of physical space equals physical products sold in the store. Much more around great data enabling increased visitations from community into that asset. It's intriguing.
No, that's exactly that was exactly what was talked about. The other great topic that's being talked about, which is on theme and on point, what you've discussed, is how technology is going to become the absolute enabler of shopping centres. So they're going to become technology players. So it's all very fascinating. And it's going to be interesting how it plays out in terms of the leasing structures.
Very interesting. And shared databases, if there was tension between rental levels, wait till they start to share databases and who owns what. It'll be fascinating. Thank you.
Fantastic. Well, now we welcome Belinda Mcphee, who is the HR Consultant Director for TSHR. And Belinda's going to talk to us about building leadership. Okay, thank you, Belinda.
Thanks so much, Anastasia, and happy Lunar New Year, everyone, the year of the ox. So that's today. So I'll talk to you about some HR trends for 2021 and just some general updates, which might be of interest to you as it relates to employment relations and workplace health and safety. So thanks, Anastasia. So 2020 was all about survival, as we know. So Daniel's taken us through his journey and we've recapped on where we've been. And now that we're in 2021, again, Daniel referred to it earlier, it's all about adaptation. So again, there's been swift adaptation in the people space, as well as all of the other spaces we've spoken about today, and lots of synergies with some of the consumer insight trends that Anastasia has spoken about that flows across and is mirrored in some of the people and culture strategies that we're seeing not only locally, but also globally. And I'll talk through some of those trends. So some of the trends that we're seeing in 2021 from a people perspective is this move away from jobs to more skills-based in terms of looking to recruit and restructure businesses. So skills are essentially the new currency in the workplace. And I'll talk about that in a bit more throughout the presentation. The other thing that we're all hearing about, it's in the media constantly, and there's lots of different perspectives on this, is the notion of flexibility. And flexibility is moving to a new concept, which is called radical flexibility, which I'll also talk through, and a move from some of the traditional flexibility that we've had to adapt to really quickly through COVID, which was around more the notion of flexibility around location. It's now going to include flexibility as it relates to working hours and how we actually perform the nature of work. So I'll talk about that in a few moments. The other really interesting thing, which, you can imagine for being nearly 12 months in this environment, is the whole rethink around the traditional performance management systems. So previously, a lot of businesses were still using their legacy systems around the performance appraisal approach by having annual reviews and all of those types of things. The trend moving forward is about having a ratingless approach to dealing with performance, making sure that process is continuous, so it's ongoing conversations rather than set time horizons, either biannually or annually. And it's moving back to the traditional management by objectives philosophy, where it's performance measured by goals. So very much just in time, project-based, and of course, always looking to the longer term goals of the organization. But because of this whole notion of adaptability, goals are going to be more short time horizons, are going to be regularly adjusted and reflected and adapted as businesses evolve through the various ways of operating. The other thing that I talked about last year that we're still seeing evolving is the redesign of work for employees to be more responsive. So whether that's around digitization and technology, automation, various other things that we have spoken about previously, that's a key trend that is continuing. And Anastasia talked about it as it relates to some consumer insight and the customer experience, but the employee value proposition is still continuing to have a much more humanized focus, more so than ever. And again, that links back to all of the human-centered leadership philosophies we've spoken about previously. But the employment value proposition is really moving around to making sure that it includes, not only the foundations of, pay, reward, benefits that we would typically see in an EVP, but also things such as mental health, which I know we've spoken about before, and Daniel also referred to. Shared purpose around people making sure that they're joining organizations that share and align to their personal values. We're seeing more of that. And also people making decisions around the companies that they're joining around social responsibility and sustainability and all of those themes, and actually taking a much more deeper and serious consideration of that when they're actually looking to move job roles. So that's something we'll talk through shortly as well. Diversity and inclusion, again, it's a theme that's constantly ramping up in the last 6 to 12 months, which needs to be considered with all of the people and culture initiatives that you put in place. Wider use of contingent workers. So we've spoken about it before, gig workers, just-in-time workers, workers with a specific skill for a very short term. We've seen lots of evolution of that, obviously, in the US, in California, with some of the recent case law that's been proven, but the whole use of contingent workers will continue. And last but not least, from a safety and wellbeing perspective, considering well-being as it relates to your vaccination strategy or philosophy. So we're seeing lots of best practice come out of the US and lots of legalities and moral discussions around, as employers, how do we actually develop and come up with our vaccination strategy and philosophy? And I've got some examples of what some US retailers are doing to help, I guess, shape some of your thinking around, what might you want to do when Australia, again, begins our rollout of vaccination very shortly. So in terms of reshaping work, again, and looking at employee expectations as it relates to the employment value proposition, some of the key shifts we're seeing is managing, again, some of those traditional work benefits that I spoke about to managing life experience. So there's been, again, lots of research where leaders are now realizing that, people do have a life outside of work, and that becomes incredibly obvious when you're Zooming people and you're seeing what's happening in the background. So there's been a shift around, again, thinking about the employee experience, not only as it relates to work, but actually as it relates to the whole person, both inside and outside of work. So going away from some of that, I guess, what would have been historically more of a token conversation around work-life balance and not really taking it to the next degree, is really getting serious about taking it to the next degree and thinking about the employee experience in terms of, how they manage their lives, work and non-work. The other key thing we're seeing, particularly in international markets, is companies taking a stance on current societal and political debates. So gone are the days where businesses are just, again, fulfilling compliance requirements as it relates to broader political and societal themes. Employees now are expecting and wanting to see evidence of companies actually taking a political stance on a particular topic, and what are the actual actions they're putting in place. And so again, the rhetoric and the sentiment is now moving beyond that to actual, what have you done? And I want to measure what you're doing and see the actual success of how you've implemented some of those societal and political beliefs. The other trend that's coming up is, again, there's a bit of a issue around gender wage gap. So there's been, again, with the whole working from home, with, again, availability of childcare, availability of schooling, and all of these things that we've seen, you know, with openings and closings of markets and lockdowns and various things. A lot of the impact of that, again, the statistics are showing, is affecting female employees more so than male employees. Again, that's just some statistics. It's generalizing that theme, but there's a prediction that females will typically want to have greater flexibility to deal and respond with all of those issues in their life. And that in some cases is taking females out of the workplace. So in the US, there's 2 million female employees that are now out of the workplace because of these issues. And those trends are being seen in the UK, in Europe, and also within Australia. There's also regulations and laws that are being looked at in terms of how you monitor your employees virtually. And so we'll see some more evidence of what we can and can't do of that. There's, again, more activity happening on that topic in the US, but we'll certainly start to see some of that happen in Australia. And again, flexibility shifting from not only location, but time. And with your COVID vaccination response, again, how you're going to approach that to provide or not provide, and the ramifications of the philosophy that you have in place will obviously, you know, attract some employees or might alienate some employees. And all the things we've spoken about before, mental health is the new norm, renting talent to fill skill gaps that links back to that gig economy. And the other key theme, which is becoming appealing for businesses, is the whole notion of, because we've got borders shut, because we've got scarce skills sitting in other markets, allowing virtual work to take place, and where we would typically sponsor someone on a visa and physically relocate them into Australia and have to deal with all of the challenges that we have in place around getting visa and sponsorship, is actually allowing for cross-border work remotely with offshore workers, and that those workers are being engaged and employed offshore with no requirement to relocate. So that then is, from a positive perspective, opening up the labour market to global talent rather than looking at local talent, and in some cases having restrictions in place because we've got labour market testing requirements within Australia for visas, etc., which are, again, impinging on our ability to recruit top talent. So in terms of the whole notion of radical flexibility, as mentioned before, there's the traditional notion of, you know, a hybrid work environment where you've got people working, whether it's in an office environment, whether it's a store environment, whether it's a hospitality warehouse environment, etc., and people working from home. So there's generally an accepted trend that a hybrid work model between home and workplace will stay in place for some time to come, but then also allowing people to consider other alternative third spaces which allow them to do, again, other things from a community perspective, networking perspective. So thinking about that more broadly. And as I said before, that real notion of, it's not only now about, you know, location for flexible work, it's about hours and how you actually conduct your work. So that's just some best practice information that was recently surveyed beginning of this year from Gartner internationally, just to share that with you. And looking at recruitment and talent trends, one of the interesting things that we're seeing in Australia, and I discussed this on our last State of the Nation, is from a recruitment perspective, if you look at all the job ad data, job advertisements and available vacancies in some cases have normalised as at November last year. So when we had a large dip where there was obviously not a lot of recruitment activity due to market lockdowns, we normalised in October. And in fact, there's a slight rise compared to the previous 12 months in terms of available jobs and people seeking people to fill jobs within the market. And what we're actually seeing is, even though there's a lift in job ads, there's actually a decline in job applications. And when there's been some assessment as to why is there a decline in job applications, job security has come up as a key priority for people that are currently employed. And so there is a reluctance of talent in a lot of cases to actually leave the jobs that they're in. So that's just something that we need to think about. In terms of practical recruitment methods, virtual hiring is here to stay. So that's something that's been enjoyed by companies and by candidates through the candidate experience. And again, that whole notion of project-based contingent workers will continue to stay. And the other thing that's a big trend is looking at the whole notion of boomerang employees, which is going back through your talent pool and approaching and rehiring some of your good leavers to come back and join your business, because the availability of talent is actually declining in some cases because people aren't wanting to move. So actually going back to people that you know and that you trust that left on good terms to try to get them to work back in your business. So they're just some other key recruitment and talent trends. I talked about skills as the new currency, and this links to some of the discussion that Anastasia had. So the most in-demand job skills that are predicted over the next 3 to 5 years from a soft skills perspective, both from a leadership, customer experience and just general employee skill set, is around that whole humanistic notion that we've talked about earlier. So creativity, persuasion, collaboration, adaptability and emotional intelligence. With jobs that require interaction heavily, they're the kind of skills that it will be heavily relied upon moving forward. And then from a hard skills perspective, the whole digitization and technology side, you can see that there's a whole host of technology-based skills that will be very important now and moving forward. But that also, on top of that, some scientific and analytical skills will also be required. And nothing is going to replace that personal service from a traditional salesmanship skill set, which is incredibly important. But overlaying that with the soft skills and that more humanistic approach that Anastasia talked about, where people want that local customer experience, that more intimate experience than what they've had again to date. So they're just some of the skills to watch out for when you're obviously recruiting. We talked about it earlier, and I probably won't spend too much time on this, but the key engagement drivers, that real sense of belonging is the real key to where engagement is moving as a trend from a people and culture perspective. And as it links to leadership is that real authentic human-centered leadership that we've spoken about before, so that people actually have confidence in their leadership and pride in the impact that they're providing through the jobs that they do. So the challenge for leaders and the challenge for businesses is to connect the dots for team members to link, again, the whole sense of purpose in terms of the organisation and what they can do in whatever job that they're fulfilling as to how that links to the higher purpose of the organisation. So that's incredibly important. And in terms of learning, so Brian talked before around learning, moving and having a key prevalence on online learning. So that's certainly going to be a key trend that we're seeing. And the only downside of that is the issue that we're coming up with through research is there is some concern around learner engagement. So being on some sort of digital online learning platform, we're finding that course completion rates are typically lower than face-to-face, and there is a little bit of digital fatigue from a learner's perspective. So online learning is here to stay. It will be a growing sector. But the key thing around engaging with learning is around making sure it's quick bite, short, sharp learning interventions of no more than typically 30 minutes to an hour to make sure that learning sticks. And the technology to support that will be around things like gamification, which some businesses are starting to use with their online learning. Virtual and augmented reality is incredibly important to create that engagement between the learner and the topic so that they feel that they're a part of it. And the introduction of, live streaming as a part of learning, chatbots through learning programs, so that there is that in engagement rather than someone just, something's being done to them through that learning experience. The other thing that we're seeing in terms of technology and automation, I'm not sure if anyone saw this out of Hong Kong over the last few weeks, but the global trend in robotics for healthcare, and also in some cases some retail, transactional-based retail activities, such as basic information, and also from the back end, from a logistics and supply chain perspective. So this picture here, this is Sophia. She's a humanoid robot. And the Hong Kong company that's launching her have a vision to mass produce Sophia by the end of the year. And predominantly, she will in the first instance support the health and medical type of industries, but also retailers are actually signing up to use the likes of Sophia for basic customer service, directions, information, to help, again, bring a little bit of fun and theatre back into retail through the use of robotics. And robotics sales, again, there's some stats there, which was pre-COVID, looking to increase by 32% worldwide. And I also read that, particularly from a manufacturing and supply chain perspective, it's looking to replace millions of usually quite transactional based roles in the coming 10 years. So businesses are really looking at investing in automation and AI and robotics in terms of how they can progress and get some fast wins in those areas that don't require that humanistic side of running a business. Some other corporate social responsibility trends, again, I mentioned earlier, lots of case studies come out of the US in terms of how businesses are approaching what to do with vaccinations. So if I give an example, in the US, we've got, I'll compare two supermarket retailers, Aldi and Lidl. They've both taken a different philosophical approach to supporting vaccination. Aldi US's philosophical approach is, we'll let people decide, but we'll remove the boundaries that stop people getting a vaccine, which is taking time off work. So what Aldi have done is they've put in a process, because of the two vaccination step process that most of the US vaccinations are working towards, is actually paying people for 4 hours for taking time off to have vaccinations. Whereas a business like Lidl, as an example, is actually physically paying their business staff members a vaccination incentive, a bonus, to go off and have the vaccination. So again, there's a whole array of philosophical, legal ramifications around how you treat that philosophy. But you can see, two examples of leading US supermarket retailers are taking a very different approach, but getting the same outcome in terms of those increasing vaccination. And then in Australia, of course, we've seen some Australian businesses returning JobKeeper payments. So Super Retail Group is probably the most known example where they've voluntarily done that. Nick Scali needed a bit of a nudge, but they obviously paid back JobKeeper. But that's just some examples of what we're seeing out there. And just in closing, I just thought I'd bring to your attention, I'm sure you've read a lot about it, is the whole discussion around industrial reform. So the Fair Work Amendment Bill was introduced to Parliament in early December last year, which was proposing amendments to the federal workplace relations regime. It doesn't have bipartisan support, so there's lots of submissions and there's lots of discussions and debates happening on this at the moment. But I just thought it was important that it's on your radar for those of you that it isn't, so you know what's about to potentially be imposed upon us. So Anastasia, if we just move to the next slide. So some discussions around, and again, a bill that's been put forward around compliance and enforcement. So wanting to increase some both civil and criminal offence limitations on non-compliance for businesses that engage dishonestly in a systematic pattern of underpayment. So what is being proposed through this bill is that corporations can now be fined 5.5 million and individuals can be fined 1.1 million, 4 years imprisonment for individuals, for directors, and disqualification of being a director. So that's they're really upping the ante on making sure there's a zero tolerance around breaches of the Fair Work Act. And then again, without going into any detail, because we'll have further detail once the bill has been ratified and amended, but the whole notion around having a statutory definition of casual employees to deal with some of the double dipping issues around casual leave entitlement as a result of the WorkPack case that was heard earlier last year, and looking to also formally extend some of the provisions that are in some of the modern awards around how you deal with regular and systematic casuals, and also some increases in part-time flexibility provisions, which are more beneficial to businesses, particularly retailers, which again, we can talk about at a later date. The other amendments that are being proposed is simplifying the enterprise bargaining process, and again, making some changes to the better off overall test threshold. And also for what they're calling zombie enterprise agreements, that are enterprise agreements that were entered prior to 2010, if they haven't been updated and approved and ratified by Fair Work, what will happen, they will have a sunset date as of the 1st of July 2022, and will revert back to the most relevant modern award. So if you're a business that has a legacy enterprise agreement that you plan to do nothing with, you just need to be aware that on 1 July 2022, if this workplace bill gets approved, that you may need to look at your industrial relations strategy to decide whether you want to go down the path of, lodging a new enterprise agreement, or whether you want to simply sunset off the EA and revert back to the modern award. So there's some strategic decisions to be made from an IR strategy perspective. And there's some easier enterprise bargaining legislation, which won't relate to the majority of the people on the call, which is around major projects related to construction and infrastructure. And then last but not least, there's been lots of discussion around wages. What do we do with wage increases? We obviously had our 1 February General Retail Industry Award, 1.75% increase that was passed for 1 February this year. So they would well and truly be in place for all of your businesses. But the RBA are essentially predicting that there's going to be no meaningful wage increases for at least 5 years. So that's, again, something to think about from a business perspective. And of course, we've got the end of JobKeeper 2.0, which is coming up on the 28th of March. And we've got the almost daily changes to our workplace health and safety requirements around mask requirements, square meterage requirements. And again, as recently as today, New South Wales, we're back to the 2 square metre rule across Greater Sydney, and masks are only mandatory now on public transport, which is great. So again, we have to constantly watch those border changes and health and safety changes. So that's all from me. So thank you all, and very best wishes for trade for the coming year.
Thanks, Belinda. That was fantastic, very educational, and a lot of information there. Fantastic. So I think, Brian, did you want to conclude the session as we lost you at the beginning?
Yeah, I think what's really interesting in summary, and Daniel and Simon, yourself, and Belle picked this up, is this whole piece around agility. I certainly think mobility and agility, not only in the way we lead, the agreements we enter into as retailers, the way we build data, the way we build communities. And some of the slides that I would have shown, and we'll keep them out with the pack, are really showing the way retailers like H&M come to mind. You know, $24 billion business globally, looking at their relationship with web chat, looking at their partnerships with suppliers, looking at the way that they increase their relevance in all activities outside shopping, which is really interesting, and the way the brand grows. So I think we're seeing very much mobility, agility, and the growth of brand. And to this point, we're seeing consumers increasingly, and you've pointed this out, Anastasia, increasingly focused on sustainability, increasingly focused on lifestyle wellness, and thinking about their time and the way they use their time. And retailers rightfully tuning into this. And so that really leads us into our next webinar, which is very much in partnership with our own international group called the Ebeltoft Group, very much looking at the way consumers are wanting more sustainable, purpose-driven organizations to do business with, and the way that retailers are adapting accordingly. So do join us. That's February 25th, and we're really looking forward to seeing you. Anastasia, anything to add to that?
No, I think one of the key things that we'll look at in that webinar is the question that I always get asked, you know, consumers, we know that they want sustainability, but what does that mean for a retailer? So what do consumers actually want in terms of sustainability, and how are businesses actually implementing this? So we all know that it's a thing, but what can we actually do about it, I think, which is really key. So we will send out the recording of today and the podcast in case you want to listen to it again. And we'll also send you a link to register for the next webinar on the 25th. And I think that's a wrap from us.
A big thanks. I know Daniel's winging his way back to Melbourne as we speak. Anastasia, thanks to you, Josh, and the team, of course. Belinda, Simon, great content, great insights. Really pleased to have you with us on the journey. So thank you. And to everyone who came and joined us today, thanks very much. And a shameless plug, we very much love working with you and building up your channel strategy, inside strategy and implementation. So please get in touch, retaildoctor.com.au. And thanks for being part of our community. We'll see you on the 25th, if not before.